process. Joining us now to discuss, LaTosha Brown, co-founder of the Black Voters Matter Fund, justice correspondent for The Nation, Ali Mistal. His new book, Allow Me to Retort, A Black Guy's Guide to the Constitution, is out March 1st. And Colorado Secretary of State Jena Griswold. LaTosha, I'm going to start with you. Senator Sinema drew a line in the sand, letting us all know the math is not going to be there to get this legislation across the finish line. So explain to me what the path forward is.
I think what we have to do is continue to put pressure on her and others. I know that there are people that are saying, well, she doesn't care. She doesn't care what happens. And we got to make her care. Right. And not just her. I think that this isn't just about Manchin and Sinema. While both of them have been extremely disappointing, I think in many ways they've been disingenuous, particularly talking about their supporting voting rights, or that at one point she voted for, she said that John Lewis was her hero. But here she is standing in the way of the very thing that he gave his life for. She is a hypocrite. She is dishonest. And she lacks integrity. But I still think that we need to hold her to account to the voters in Arizona. We just left Arizona. People are very, very upset with her, and we're going to make sure that we lift that voice in that process to let her know. And I think the path forward is not just we have to focus on all of the Senate. We have to focus on the 16 Republican senators that actually voted for the reauthorization of the voting rights bill. What has happened since that time to this time that they would cowardice in the face of a big lie that has taken root in this country? We've got to hold them all to account.
Secretary Griswold, this fight is, of course, about more than ballot access. Republicans are also approving unfair district maps, seizing control of the election process while recruiting Trump loyalists to oversee elections. So talk to me about how all of these forces build on one another to undermine our democracy.
Well, first off, thank you for having me on. And that is exactly right. As Secretary of State, my job is to make sure that every eligible voter, Republican, Democrat, and Independent alike, has access to safe and secure elections, and I'll continue to do that. But the Senate has to recognize the coordinated takeover of voting rights and elections that is happening right now. Since the beginning of 2021, on the heels of the insurrection, we've seen over 500 bills to suppress the vote. We are seeing fake audits to chip away at Americans' confidence, vitriol to election workers, causing them to consider and really think twice if they even want to do the jobs. All while extremists like Steve Bannon are recruiting people into a local election administration, and insurrectionists or big liars are running for Secretary of State's positions in every swing state in this nation. So the urgency is now, and if the Senate wants to prevent another January 6th, they need to act immediately.
Ali, Andrea Waters King, the mother of Martin Luther King Jr.'s granddaughter, had this message earlier on MSNBC. Take a listen.
Our daughter, Yolanda, is the only grandchild of Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King. She was born in 2008. In 2013, the Voting Rights Act, which was the cornerstone of her grandfather's legacy, was basically dismantled. In 2021, last year, in our home state of Georgia, one of the 19 states that has passed these repressive and suppressive voting rights laws were passed in our home state. So when you think about it, she and her peers are today sitting with less voting rights than the day that they were born. And I always think, I can't imagine, is that the dream that Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King had for their granddaughter and other children?
Ali, what does this moment tell us about ourselves as a nation? Rather than talking about how we expand access, we are fighting over the bare minimum.
Yeah, look, the people like Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, these are the white people that Martin Luther King Jr. warned us about. These are the white liberals who have no sense of urgency, commitment, or integrity when it comes to the progress of justice in the country. And that's just a fact. I don't know if they can live with themselves with that, but that is the reality of their situation. The other reality here, and Bernice mentioned it in that clip, the chief architect of this assault on voting rights is not Mitch McConnell. It's not David Duke. It's not whatever boogeyman you think is hiding under the closet. The chief architect is Chief Justice John Roberts. It is he who has been an enemy of voting rights and racial equality from his very first job out of law school, which was to oppose the 1982 amendments to the Voting Rights Act. It is John Roberts who authored Shelby County v. Holder in 2013, which eviscerated Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, which is basically why we're here right now. It is John Roberts who authored Rucho in 2020, which swung wide the doors towards gerrymandering. And it's John Roberts who provided the crucial fifth vote in last year's Brnovich decision, which eviscerated Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. This has all been done by Federalist Society conservatives that have been put on the Supreme Court. And until we stop them, until we do something about the court, you want to pass your Freedom to Vote Act? I think that's a great bill. We should pass it. I think we should have passed H.R. 1. But always remember that John Roberts and his conservative cronies are waiting at the Supreme Court level to strike down whatever laws we put forward. As long as you let Republicans control the Supreme Court, you cannot have a fair and equal, just society.
LaTosha, there's also the reality that as all of this plays out at the federal level, it's a lot of state organizers on the ground who are going to have to figure out how they organize state voters around some of these limitations. I've heard from many organizers who said there is no amount of organizing that is going to get us around these obstacles, and still the work will continue. How are you approaching it in the state of Georgia?
Listen, we're going to have to continue to work and on the local level, because what we're seeing is we're seeing the hits. We're seeing in the state of Georgia with the passage of SB 202 from last year that the Republicans are already attempting to take over election boards. Here in Fulton County, which is the county that I live, the largest, most populous county in Georgia, they're attempting currently right now as we speak to take over that board. Lincoln County, which is County, has a 30% African-American population here in Georgia. There's an effort being led by Republicans right now to close all of the polling sites in that county, with the exception of leaving one. And this is a county that public transportation, there are no public accommodations that are available. And so what we're seeing is all across the board, what they're doing, they're instituting it on all levels, the local, the state, and the federal level, which is why we need federal legislation. But as we think about going forward, that's a short-term solvent. We need to actually have a structural change in this country. We need to rethink about the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court should be expanded. We need to make sure that we have a Senate that is more reflective of the citizens of this country, which means we need D.C. to have statehood, for Puerto Rico to have statehood. Why are we accepting taxation without representation? And so we've got to really understand that in order for us to have the kind of democracy that's laid out in the Constitution, we're going to have real systemic and structural change in this country.
Secretary Griswold, as you are well aware, the conversation, or there are those who want the conversation to narrow to be just about how votes are counted, because it seems that that might be the one place where some of the so-called moderate Republicans are willing to come on board. Is that going to be enough to safeguard our democracy?
Absolutely not. The people need access to vote. And frankly, what this is about is making sure that the people of Georgia and Texas have just as much access as Coloradans, as they should, as U.S. citizens. What this comes down to is some Republicans do not want the American people to choose their representation anymore. They're willing to strip away voting rights to keep their own power. It's one of the most un-American things that can happen. And it's incumbent on all of us, the activists at the local level who will need to organize to make sure Americans can have their voices heard. We have to keep on pushing the Senate to wake up to the destruction of American democracy, the code red that is happening right now. But also voters are going to be faced with a big task. There are people running right now to oversee elections that do not believe in democracy. So it's going to be so important in 2022 that voters are paying attention to the candidates running at the local level and for Secretary of State. Democracy is on the ballot in 2022. And for this country to continue, we need people elected to these positions who will uphold the will of the American people.
LaTosha, Ellie, Secretary of State Griswold, thank you all for getting us started. Next.